Desert Immigrants by Mario T. Garcia, Chapter 10. Border Culture. Oops. Working among themselves as manual laborers and living in segregated barrios adjacent to their homeland, Mexican immigrants in El Paso and throughout the Southwest, like other newcomers to the United States, maintained native customs that helped provide a sense of community. As one historian has correctly written of the northern movement of Mexicans, Mexican immigration bore little resemblance to the uprooting experience which Oscar Handling depicted as characteristic of European immigration. Indeed, continuity rather than alienation, marginality, and social disorganization characterized Mexican immigration. Yet within El Paso's large Mexican population, the cultural differences also existed. Mexican Americans, educated and sophisticated political refugees, and the mass of poor immigrants comprised diverse cultural enclaves, although they were linked by common language and certain Mexican traditions. Moreover, cultural continuity coexisted with some cultural change. The immigrants' adjustment to new working conditions, especially in urban areas, their relationship with more Americanized Mexican Americans, and the impact of certain gringo institutions such as the schools introduced a gradual acculturation. Cultural change among Mexican immigrants, especially children, likewise occurred because, as Ernesto Galarza indicates, working-class immigrant brought no formal institutions to perpetuate its culture, unquote. Cultural continuity, as well as cultural change, the two-time developing a Mexican border culture can be detected in the family, recreational activities, religion, and voluntary associations. The family represented the most basic cultural institution transferred by Mexican immigrants and was the most resistant barrier to American assimilation. Besides young single males who entered the United States seeking work, many families also arrived. The Dillingham Commission report of 1911 observed that a high percentage of Mexican laborers in Western industries had brought their wives from Mexico. According to the commission, 81.5% of Mexican railroad shop workers in the survey reported their wives in the United States. Investigators discovered a similar condition in urban-related work. 60% of Mexicans employed as construction workers by street railways stated they had their wives with them. Although no substantial research has been done in the composition and nature of working class or peasant families in Mexico during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, nevertheless, it appears that the family formed a strong social and economic unit. Galarza, in his autobiography, Barrio Boy, recalls that his family in rural Nayarit included not only his mother, who had divorced his father prior to Galarza's birth, but also his aunt, 3 uncles, and 2 cousins. In the Galarza household, the men went to labor in the fields during the day, while the women and children performed the housework and cooking. Leaving Mexico and entering the United States, the Mexican family, rather than weakened by the immigration process, appears to have remained strong and retained its native character. A sample of the 1900 manuscript census for El Paso reveals that the large majority of Mexican immigrant households were either nuclear or extended. See Table 10.1. Out of 152 household units, the sample 56% were nuclear families living by themselves or in an augmented relationship with non-related household residents, such as boarders. In addition, 13% were extended households, nuclear families living with one or more relatives Indeed, more Mexican immigrant families lived in nuclear households than did the non Spanish surnamed. Perhaps reflecting more individual mobility, a large percentage of non Spanish surnames were recorded as single person households than Mexican immigrants. On the other hand, more broken homes could be found among the Mexican immigrant population, especially involving a mother and her children. However, it is possible that in some cases husbands were not recorded because they had jobs outside the city. By far most Mexican Americans lived in nuclear households, although many apparent took in boarders, because the 1910 and 1920 manuscript censuses are not yet available for scholars. No comparison can be made. It is conceivable that over this 20-year period, the number of extended households among Mexican immigrants grew as more relatives arrived once a pattern of chain migration had been set, especially from the northern Mexican states. Jess Lopez, for example, who now resides in Santa Barbara, remembers that when he left Mexico as a young boy and entered El Paso in 1910, the entire family crossed the border, including his parents, brothers, and sisters, paternal grandparents, and his maternal grandmother. Moreover, in another study of Mexican immigrant community, one scholar remarks that chain migration from certain towns in Mexico reinforced not only native customs, values, and institutions, but also extended family and the traditional Mexican kinship system. It is likely that among Mexican immigrants in El Paso and other parts of the United States, the movement from their native land to another country served to increase kinship ties as a way of finding jobs and temporary homes and of dealing with what one historian calls, quote, critical life situations, sickness, unemployment, death, or some other form of disaster. Here is the graph so that you can really get a good look at that. Although some Mexican women in El Paso and throughout the urban Southwest contributed to household incomes by taking in wash or lodgers, no disintegration took place in the traditional pattern of men being the chief wage earners and women doing household work. Of course, certain lower-class women in Mexico were wage workers. The 1900 El Paso census sample shows that no mothers and almost no daughters, most being too young, worked outside the home in an immigrant family headed by the father. Although no data exist, some women may have worked part-time. Nevertheless, the necessity of more women having to become wage workers over the years no doubt affected family patterns. This appears to be true as daughters grew to working age throughout the region. According to a Los Angeles survey taken by Paul S. Taylor in 1928, the majority of Mexican women took jobs in industry because, quote, of poverty due either to the irregular work of the male members of the family or to the combination of large families, low wages, high rents, unquote. However, the entrance of women into the job market constituted, as Taylor put it, a process contrary to their customs and traditions. Taylor believed that such radical changes in the daily lives of Mexican women could not help but produce cultural changes, especially within the family. The University of California scholar observed both older as well as younger women in industrial jobs, but he detected more profound alterations in the habits of younger Mexicans. Not only did they adapt to the work routine better, but what little education they secured in American schools, especially the learning of English, made them more productive and efficient. Quote, they look upon some sort of industrial work, unquote. Taylor wrote, as soon as they have completed the minimum amount of schooling as the natural course of events, unquote. Besides acquiring some new material and cultural tastes, that they introduced into the home. By the 1920s, young Mexican working women appear to have begun to exhibit a desire for greater independence from strict family practices. Her parents are apt to be ignored. Taylor stressed, she tends to break away from the old custom of parental authority, unquote. When Taylor's observations would also pertain to El Paso cannot be determined due to a lack of similar studies in the border city. Certainly, young Mexican women who worked in the laundries and garment factories, and possibly even as domestics, may have displayed parallel characteristics. The economic necessity for Mexican women to find jobs, likewise, appears to have challenged to a degree the traditional male dominated Mexican family structure. Although perhaps Mexican fathers could more easily accept their daughters than their wives working outside the home, a pattern not uncommon in Mexico, still Taylor noticed that Mexican men resented women working or wanting to work. One man stated that women should not work because that was a man's duties, whereas women's consisted of keeping house. Another husband told Taylor that he could not allow his wife to work because his friends would then think he could not adequately provide for his family. Another insisted that his wife could not have a job outside the home since no women in his family had ever worked. Moreover, it was neither necessary nor correct. The pressure of higher living costs north of the border, however, eventually forced many Mexican women into the job market. While more research needs to be conducted into the full impact that this process had on family culture, it seems that traditional patterns slowly changed over the years. One Mexican man who had lived in the United States for over 25 years told anthropologist Manuel Gamio in the 1920s that he disliked the transformation Mexican women underwent in the Southwest. According to Carlos Ignatius, he disliked American laws that allowed women too many rights and made them less subordinate to men. Now the Mexican women who came here, Ignatius emphasized, also take advantage of the laws and want to be like the American women. Because of the change, Ignatius concluded that if he ever married, it would be in Mexico. Yet accommodation in the family patterns among Mexican immigrants and their children rather than disruptions should perhaps be stressed. As Virginia Yans McLaughlin points out in her study of Italian immigrant families in Buffalo, acculturation did not necessarily lead to a breakdown of traditional male authority in the family, emphasizing that strong cultural traditions, in addition to employment patterns, sustained male authority. Jans McLaughlin writes, "The point is that male authority did not depend entirely upon fulfillment of economic obligations. Therefore, when a woman co-opted the male's economic function in a whole or in part by becoming a wage earner, she did not necessarily obtain greater bargaining power and so tip the balance of family authority in her favor." What can be concluded is that the Mexican immigrant family's cultural accommodation, resulting primarily from the socializing roles of more Americanized sons and daughters, appears to have laid the foundation for a second and third generation Mexican-American family structure, exhibiting many of the values and characteristics common to a middle-class Anglo-Saxon family. Outside the family, it seems that the majority of Mexican immigrants did not actively participate in secondary institutions such as mutual societies, Mexican patriotic groups, or church organizations. Most Mexican immigrant workers, although they may have belonged to some of these groups and attended certain of their functions, apparently did not have the time or energy to be active members. One historian correctly observes of black working class migrants to Cleveland in the late 19th century that their lives, unlike the middle and upper class, remain simple due to the lack of options. The same can be said of most Mexicans. Within the family Mexicans found their primary security for dealing with the problems of everyday life. Consequently, much Mexican popular culture in El Paso and throughout the Southwest centered on family recreational activities and existed apart from particular institutions, which tended to be under the direction of more prosperous immigrants, political refugees, and some Mexican Americans. Within the family, Mexicans preserved many native cultural traditions that aided them in their transition to a new American setting. By providing a familiar cultural environment, it is difficult to arrive at an accurate picture of family life in El Paso, but anthropologist Manuel Gamio noted certain customs being practiced in the late 1920s by Mexican immigrant families in El Paso and other southwestern locations. Gamio observed that despite the fact that Mexican immigrants accepted American material goods such as housing, clothing, domestic utensils, and machinery, they still retained earlier popular customs. These included folklore, songs, and ballads, birthday celebrations, saints' day, baptisms, weddings, and funerals in the traditional style. Owing to poverty, a lack of physicians in the barrios, plus traditional customs, the Mexican scholar witnessed the continued use of medical herbs by both Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans. Quote, in almost all parts of America where there are Mexicans and Mexican Americans, he stressed, there are Mexican drugstores in which there is a great sale of every sort of medicinal plant. Mexicans along the border could also find remedies for their physical and emotional ailments by visiting Mexican healers known as curanderos. I cure by means of herbs, one curandia in Tucson informed Gamio. But I never promise to cure this one or that one, because that is something of God. I have cured many Mexicans of syphilis and tuberculosis and other diseases. I have also helped to assist at childbirth at many times when the doctors have let me. Unquote. The existence of such popular traditions illustrates what scholars have discovered in studies of migration patterns. The persistence of earlier pre-industrial cultural practices within an industrializing society, or what one sociologist refers to as an urban village. Immigrant families interviewed by Gamio further acknowledged that for the most part they continued to cook Mexican style. Quote, I don't suffer in the matter of food, one woman told him in Los Angeles, for my mother cooks at home as if we were in Mexico. There are some dishes which are different, but we generally eat Mexican style and rice and beans are almost never lacking from our table. Unquote. According to a report by one of Gamio's associates, however, Mexican families in certain areas purchased items such as canned chili, canned sauces, and canned tomatoes. When California obtaining food processed in the United States often led to complaints about the inadequacy and poor quality of American products in the cooking of Mexican dishes. Quote, the foodstuffs, besides costing a lot, another woman informed Gamio, are no good for making good Mexican food, so that it might be said that the food is half Mexican and half American, being neither the one nor the other, unquote. Most Mexican families in El Paso avoided this dietary problem by apparently purchasing much of their food in Juarez. Mexican folk customs, both inside and outside the family, included a variety of oral traditions. Although evidence of this literature's origin is difficult to determine, some of its Mexicans created in Texas and other southwestern states. Oral literature included cuentos, Mexican tales, children's stories, legends, ghost and goblin stories such as La Llorona, the Weeper, and Los Duendes, the goblins, and dichos, sayings and proverbs. Based on the Spanish Romance, perhaps the best recognized form of oral literature, has been the songs and ballads called corridos, which the Mexicans sang in Spanish with their families and fellow workers. Quote, the songs are a people's heritage, unquote. Mexican American folklorist Americo Paredes stresses their unself-consciousness record of themselves alien for the most part to document and books, unquote. Singing in the family involved songs sung by mothers to their children or while doing housework. Singing was part of the evening's entertainment along with the prose narratives, riddles, and games. All family members participated in these performances, and the singing ranged from corridos to children's songs. If a guitar was available, some songs would be accompanied by music, usually those sung by the men. Some would be preceded by a prose narrative. Quote, the father had the role of oral historian in the family. Paredes notes the mother being more likely to specialize in legends and tales of the supernatural. One Mexican emphasized in the 1920s that his family always played Mexican music in the home, so that one doesn't feel the change, unquote. Besides family singing, music and songs were important at extended family gatherings, weddings, and fiestas, celebrating anniversaries. Finally, men often sang at cantinas, bars, and usually in a much louder and boisterous fashion than done in the home. While the song form remained Mexican and in Spanish, the content increasingly centered on an immigrant experience as well as sentiments toward events in Mexico. The corridos are, Gamio wrote, of all the songs collected nearest to the human interest story of the popular newspaper, like the human interest story, they express the interests and attitudes of the people, unquote. During the Mexican Revolution, hundreds of corridos appeared about the battles and heroes of the Civil War. One corrido, apparently written in either Juarez or El Paso, commemorated Francisco Madero's victory over Diaz at Juarez. At one time, Paredes explains, when the events were fresh in everyone's mind, it probably was sung all up and down the Texas-Mexican borderline. Entitled La Toma de Ciudad Juarez, the capture of Ciudad Juarez, this corrido expresses pride in Madero's victory and in his men's courage. Translated, Mexico is a very happy people. By thousands are giving thanks. I will begin with Durango, then Torreon, and Ciudad Juarez, where the blood of government soldiers were seen to flow. Girls of Ciudad Juarez were gradually startled to find yourselves in so many skirmishes, in so many battles, to see the Maristas setting up their machine guns. Comet Halley's, how true was the prophecy that you had been announcing. To see the Maristas ruling in this land, Porfirio out of a job on his way to Europe. A few years later, a popular corrido dealt with the imprisonment of a Mexican contraband smuggler in the El Paso area. Transported out of the border city and on his way to Leavenworth, the smuggler wonders whether he will ever see his family again. and on the train, vowing never to smuggle again. He warns his countrymen to avoid landing in American jails. For once in all your friends forget you. Smuggling is very nice. You can make a lot of money, but friends, do not forget what a prisoner must suffer. Who will not believe it, let him try it for himself. Let them have a go at smuggling, and they'll see where they will end. On the eve of St. Lawrence's Day, about 11 in the morning, we stepped on the threshold of the penitentiary. Mother of mine, I leave you a sigh and an embrace. This is the Ballad of the Contraband of El Paso. Many Mexican songs and corridos express the hardships of life in the United States and a hope that the immigrant experiences would be short. The return to Mexico remained the goal of most Mexicans, based on an actual event. The corrido of a Rio Pampa, unquote, relates the hanging of a Mexican in California for the murder of an American. Although Pampa claimed self-defense, 20,000 fellow Mexicans petitioned for his pardon. But the execution took place with Pampa exclaiming, translated, "Farewell, my friends, farewell, my village, dear mother, cry no more. Tell my race not to come here, for here they will suffer. There is no pity here." The jailer asked him, "Were you Spanish?" And he answered, "I am a Mexican and proud of being so. Although they deny me a pardon. This is the story of a compatriot who 4 years ago came there and through misfortune on the same date died in a dreadful way in a prison." In addition to music enjoyed in the home and in cantinas, Mexicans in El Paso could take advantage of another native cultural tradition. Sunday band concerts in the plaza or park. As early as 1893, Santiago Oguian Laredo advertised in a Spanish-language newspaper that his orchestra played in an El Paso park. 1 year later, apparently depleted of his musicians, Oguian Laredo appealed for other musicians in order to organize a band to perform Mexican music. With the increase in Mexican immigration, larger and more sophisticated concert bands appeared. The Herald observed in 1916 that Rito Medina's band would present an outdoor summer concert. Although no mention of the location was made, but presumably it may have taken place in the downtown plaza, the following year, the most popular local band consisted of the Mexican American Band, directed by Raimundo S. Gonzalez, perhaps the most respected Mexican musical group in El Paso. During this era was Concha's band, led by Trinidad Concha, a former assistant director of Porfirio Diaz's touring band. Concha arrived in El Paso around 1896 and formed his first border city ensemble. By 1907, Concha's band had 40 members and performed at numerous gatherings, including political rallies of the Democratic Ring. According to the Times, the band members included wage-working El Paso citizens. The highlight of Concha's band occurred in 1911 when they serenaded Madero via Orozco and the revolutionary forces camped on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande. Across from the El Paso smelter, entertaining both Mexican and American audiences, bands such as Concha's played mainly European compositions that over the years had become Mexicanized, more sophisticated in their selection of classical tunes, which were apparently intended to appeal to Mexican as well as American bourgeois tastes. These local bands and their music stood in sharp contrast to the folk songs composed by Mexican workers themselves and indicated cultural and class segmentation within El Paso's Mexican population. Mexicans in El Paso also patronized concerts performed by touring Mexican artists. The Times acknowledged the arrival in 1894 of the Mexican Female Orchestra, which had been touring the United States. Quote, on arriving at the smelter where jackals, burros, and little Mexicans were to be seen in abundance, unquote, the newspaper informed its readers. The members of the troupe were delighted and did not hesitate to express their satisfaction at again seeing familiar scenes. Several years later, in 1916, the consul arranged for a Mexican orquesta tipaca to present an outdoor concert attended by many Mexicans in Juarez. El Paso political refugees and Americans, including favorite Mexican tunes, the concert proved to be a large success. There was nothing but the most friendly feeling, the Herald reporter wrote, and the Mexican part of the audience seemed to immensely pleased that their native music and the musicians from their country were so much appreciated, unquote. Musical variety shows called tundras de variedades by Mexican theaters in South El Paso proved to be popular after 1910. For 10 to 15 cents a performance, Mexican workers could sit in the galleries and be entertained by touring Mexican show people. The only place in El Paso where variety shows are performed in Spanish, unquote, boasted the Estrella Theater. Although Mexican theaters throughout the Southwest initially presented both a film and a tanda, in time, according to one critic, the moving pictures superseded both Spanish-speaking vaudeville and the legitimate theater. Legitimate theater in El Paso meant that, for the most part, Mexican theaters appealed to the middle-class taste of wealthier and more prominent Mexican political refugees. For example, in 1915, the El Paso Theater announced various opera performances by touring Ricardo de la Vega Company. Included in their repertoire was the Susana Coste, La Coste Susana, which had been requested by the most cultured Mexican society of El Paso. The still operating Colon Theater in South El Paso Street opened in 1919 by presenting the opera Rigoletto. Besides operas, these same variety houses offered touring Mexican actors such as Virginia Fabregas troupe and the Mercedes Navarro Company, which offered plays by European playwrights. She is the first actress with reason. A Mexican drama historian wrote of Virginia Fabregas in 1932, not of what the theater was then, but of what it would be later. And consequently, she is the first modern actress in Mexico. In a study of an early Mexican troupe in the Southwest, one scholar emphasized the imported as well as bourgeois character of border drama. The repertory contained 93 plays from foreign, i.e. non-Mexican stages, 1 by a Belgian, 2 by Germans, 3 by Italians, 7 by Frenchmen, and 80 by Spaniards. 53 plays are by Mexican authors. As to the plays themselves, 84 are tragedies, dramas, or melodramas, and 62 are comedies. The majority are romantic in style. Only 18 were not produced in Mexico City before the troupe brought them out. These may well have been commissioned of local authors by the managers, although it cannot be determined if Mexican workers in large numbers attended the operas or plays. Dramas for them often took the form of religious plays performed during certain church celebrations, such as the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Not a single year passes. El Paso church historian Cleophas Calaras later wrote, without a religious drama being performed and repeated 2 or 3 times, nevertheless, the existence of a Mexican high culture, unquote, in El Paso as expressed through the legitimate theater and the opera served only to increase the social and cultural distance between the working community and the more prominent Mexican businessmen, professionals, and especially middle-class political refugees. Dancing parties in the barrio where drinking occurred were another form of entertainment for the Mexican workers and their families. Dance halls operated in El Paso primarily in the red light district on Utah Street bordering Ciudad, but no evidence exists that Mexicans attended in large numbers. Instead, dance parties in their own jacals and tenements represented a less expensive diversion and way of having a good time. Yet officials who desired a sober and industrious Mexican population at times frowned on the Mexicans' attempt to dance and drink. On one occasion in 1906, El Paso police arrested 2 Mexican men and a Mexican woman for disturbing the peace at a dance on 6th Street. Evidence presented at their trial tried to prove that much whiskey had been available at the fiesta. Mrs. Theron, one of the defendants, acknowledged the presence of liquor. Why, of course everybody knows, she explained. That one is going to drink and be jolly at a dance, drink whiskey and wine. In an attempt to find her guilty of drunkenness, the prosecution charged Mrs. Duran with having drunk too much at the dance. Yes, she replied, but I had a right to. I was an invited guest. The court found the Mexican women innocent but fined one of the men $5. After 1910, the wealthier political refugees sponsored, in contrast to the workers' dances and parties, numerous balls in Liberty Hall, El Paso's foremost concert hall. Social clubs organized by the refugees for such functions included the Circulo Latina, the Central Cultural Porfirio Diaz, the Club Laredo de Tejada, and the Club Progresista. Outside the home, the Mexicans patronized various other forms of entertainment and recreation. Men visited Mexican bars, pool halls, and gambling establishments in both El Paso and Juarez. At the turn of the century, some Mexicans sponsored horse races in Washington Park, with attendants from not only the city, but the surrounding area as well. On its visits to the border, the circus stood out as a special treat for Mexican children and their parents. The Times recorded in 1887 that Mexicans, as well as Americans, had attended John Robinson's great circus back in back of the Santa Fe Depot. Elephants, camels, and other strange beasts, a reporter observed, captured the attention of the Mexican spectators. Mexicans from the adjacent territory also came in large numbers. They camped next to the circus tents. The Times man wrote, and everyone spent their dinero freely. Mexicans, along with Americans, eagerly awaited the arrival of such special attractions as the Ringling Brothers' Greatest Show on Earth and Barnum and Bailey's Circus. Besides American circuses, small Mexican traveling shows with acrobats and side shows called carpas visited El Paso and performed in Ciudad. According to one Mexican-American critic, these carpas included improvised satirical skits. The brief topical skits of La Carpa he proposes, with their focus on physical movement and rapid verbal gymnastics, are the progenitors of today's Chicano. actos, unquote. Mexicans also spent their limited leisure time at spectacular sports that helped distract their minds from homesickness, work, and harsh living conditions. Bullfights in Juarez, for example, were a cultural link with the La Prateria. Boxing matches on both sides of the border enticed many males, Mexican boxers such as Benny Chavez, and Mexican Americans like lightweight Aurelio Herrera held special attraction for the Mexican fans. By 1900, Mexicans also began to show an interest in American baseball. In addition to its attraction as a spectator event, some Mexicans, mostly Mexican Americans, organized baseball teams of their own. The Internationals stood out as the earliest and most popular Mexican baseball team in the border city, with an all-Mexican lineup and playing against Anglo-American teams. The Internationals proved to be one of the finest clubs in El Paso for several years and played games throughout the Southwest. Sports writers considered the Mexican-American players among the finest athletes. Jose Curly Villarreal, playing for a local team in 1917, was regarded as the best pitcher in the city league. One writer commented that with Curly on the pitching mound, it is a safe bet that a large number of Mexican fans will be out Sunday to see their favorite in action. The allure of American baseball for Mexicans transcended the border and began to have cultural impact in Mexico. Baseball is showing promise, the Times proudly reported in 1908, of becoming the national game of Mexico, as well as the United States. Admitting that other foreign sports such as cricket, field hockey, and polo had some following in the neighboring republic, the Times believed that those cultural imports could not compare with the grand old game. The newspaper subjectively concluded that the sport physically suited the Mexicans due to their natural quickness. Moreover, it recognized the language influence that baseball had on Mexicans with the acceptance of baseball terms such as "you're out." The Times further understood the political objective American baseball served in Mexico. Baseball would create a sympathetic link between Mexicans and Americans. Switched. Two men cheering for the same team. It emphasized would find it more difficult to disagree on other matters. At the same time, the United States had become Mexico's principal trade partner and investor. The Times boasted that south of the border, American baseball had outdistanced British, French, German, and other European sports. The border publication predicted that it would be only a matter of time before the better classes in Mexico would stop bullfighting and then baseball would become the national sport. When the mob can no longer have it bullfighting, unquote, the Times stressed, baseball will be the national game from Central America to the Great Lakes. In spite of strong Mexican cultural influences in El Paso, owing to increased Mexican immigration and the city's proximity to the border, Mexicans underwent subtle cultural changes. After 1910, for example, they faced the acculturation influence of American mass culture. Through the silent movies, although it does not appear that the early movie houses such as the Crawford, the Grand, the Little Wigwam, and the Bihu, specifically excluded Mexicans to the attendance of Mexicans at the movies grew when several Mexican theaters opened by the period of World War I. The International Amusement Company of El Paso, owned and managed by Mexican businessmen, including Mexican-American Politico Frank Alderot, operated 7 theaters in the border city. These included the Alcazar, the Eureka, the Hidalgo, the Paris, the Iris, and Rex movie houses on South El Paso Street. By 1917, these theaters showed some films produced in Mexico, but for the most part, Mexican audiences paid $6 or 11 cents admission, depending on where one sat, to see American movies featuring such stars as Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and Fatty Arbuckle. Quote, regardless of what some may say, unquote, La Petra commented in reviewing a Chaplin film at the Teatro Rex, quote, Carlos Chaplin is a magnificent artist. He is not vulgar clown, but rather a refined and competent comic actor whose every gesture, every graceful pose brings forth joy not only for children but for adults, unquote. Besides exposing Mexicans to some American material and cultural values and mores, the movies may have influenced their ability to understand some English. Mexicans employed by the movie houses translated English subtitles to Spanish ones, which appeared at the bottom of the screen below the original dialogue. American slang was no problem, remarked the Times reporter, for the translators of slapstick comedies screened at Mexican theaters. Even Americans studying Spanish took advantage of the process and visited Mexican theaters to improve their Spanish reading ability. The reporter further noted that the technique of imposing the Spanish translation on the films had been invented by a Mexican employee of the International Amusement Company and, quote, is now in use wherever American films are used for Spanish-speaking audiences. Guillermo Balderas recalls that his own brother, Eduardo, worked as a translator in one of the Mexican movie houses. These were silent movies, unquote. Balderas remembers that were translated into Spanish. By the 1920s, American movies were an important acculturation agent, especially on the first generation native born on both sides of the border. As one Mexican immigrant explained in Corrido, Hollywood films had enticed him to leave Mexico for the promised land. I dreamed in my youth of being a movie star, and one of these days I came to visit Hollywood. For Mexican immigrants, Catholicism provided a familiar cultural environment as well as institutional support for their adjustment. North of the border, the Catholic Church in El Paso, under the control of Irish Americans, recognized quite early that it would have to establish separate facilities for its Mexican members. Consequently, it organized Mexican parishes in the barrios to serve the particular religious and social needs of the immigrants. Unlike many national churches in the United States, however, those in El Paso were not staffed, for the most part, by Mexican priests, of whom there was an apparent shortage in the Southwest, but by Italian and American clergy. As a result, the church not only took into consideration Mexican cultural traditions, but also became an agent of Americanization. Among its parishioners, especially those families, many of them political refugees, who could afford to send their children to Catholic schools. Still, the mass of Mexican immigrants retained their popular religious beliefs and practices by transferring them across the border. Regardless of economic or political backgrounds, first-generation immigrants and political refugees, through their reestablishment of spiritual societies common in Mexico, as well as the reenactment of native Mexican religious celebrations, successfully maintained cultural continuity and helped create a sense of community in the barrios. As an institution, the Catholic Church in El Paso pursued a bicultural approach in its treatment of Mexican immigrants. The Southside parochial schools, for example, under the direction of the American Sisters of Laredo, emphasized as one part of their curriculum the Americanization of their students and attempted to change what they considered to be the Mexicans' bad cultural habits. Sister Magdalene Diaz, who arrived as the first principal of Sacred Heart School when it opened in 1892, later wrote in her diary, My first experience at the Sacred Heart was the 80 overgrown Mexican boys, some of them wearing mustaches, unkempt, untidy, with shirt tails hanging out. They knew absolutely nothing of order or discipline. After a morning or two, I managed to explain to them that 3 signals the bell would be given. Accordingly, at the next dismissal, I saw the boys leaping from every window they were passing out. I had not thought to state they were to pass out through the door. Sorry, that's funny. In addition to a basic curriculum emphasizing religious and academic subjects with some industrial and domestic training, Sacred Heart School presented performances displaying both the talents of young Mexicans as well as the influences of American middle-class culture. The Times reported in 1895 the Sacred Heart School students would offer a musical and dramatic entertainment at the Old Stone Church in North Oregon Street. Mainly performed in English, the school's closing exercise in 1904 took place at Myers Opera House, where a large audience assembled. According to the Times critic, the entertainment not only proved to be interesting, but also reflecting great credit on the nuns who taught at Sacred Heart. The best acts included the singing of the Poor Old Tramps by a male choir and an instrumental performance by the Mandolin Club that was rendered without a single discord, and gave promise that El Paso will have a number of skillful musicians who, with light touch, will call forth the musics that stirs men's souls. Some of the girls who presented a drama in 3 acts entitled The Little Waiters received round upon round of applause and demonstrated the fact that several of the young ladies had real dramatic ability. Impressed, the Times gave credit to the students, teachers, and praised the Catholic Church for its work among the Mexican children of the city. The performance had demonstrated, the paper concluded, that there is an efficient and practical movement on foot to educate the Catholic youth and young girls of El Paso and teach them how to become good citizens and dutiable daughters. Sorry, I got lost. And faithful wives. There we go. Yet English and middle-class American customs at Sacred Heart shared the curriculum with Spanish and Mexican cultural traditions. Cleophas Caleras, who attended Sacred Heart during the first decade of the century, remembered that although there were only 2 Mexican teachers in a faculty of 10, both English and Spanish were used in instruction along with American and Mexican history. Years later, lecturing to the 1919 graduating girls of Sacred Heart, the Italian pastor of the parish encouraged them to adopt the best of other cultures, but to never forget who they were, young Catholic Mexican girls who were obliged to follow Christ and as Mexicans to conserve the beautiful customs and traditions of La Reza. Hence, Sacred Heart, as well as the other Mexican parochial schools, served a twofold purpose. They helped transmit Mexican ethnicity and at the same time provided lessons in English and American culture in order to assist students to adjust and hopefully succeed in the United States. Next to Sacred Heart, the religious and cultural activities of St. Ignatius Church at Park and Second perhaps best exemplified the church's interest in the Mexicans' adjustment for the spiritual needs of its members. St. Ignatius sponsored a variety of religious groups popular in Mexico. In 1905, some women formed the League of Sacred Heart and the Congregation of the Daughters of Mary, Congregation de las Hijas de Maria. That same year, a group of young people and children organized the Congregation of San Luis Gonzaga as a prayer union for youth. Care of the church scarcity led to the beginning of the altar society. Still, other parishioners, especially women, belonged to additional religious associations, such as the Society of Good Death, Buena Muerta, the Society of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Society of Divine Providence, and the Association of Christian Mothers. Besides their specific devotions, many of these organizations assisted in the more popular religious ceremonies among the Mexican working class, such as the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and of course, at Christmas when parishioners performed the shepherd's play, Los Pasteros. The Corpus Christi procession held every June, however, was the most impressive popular religious feast day, clearly fostering a communal spirit among the entire Mexican population of El Paso. Although this event centered around Sacred Heart Church, all Mexican parishes participated. In 1919, for example, between 10,000 and 20,000 Mexicans marched in the annual procession, with thousands were watching, making the Revista Católica, the Spanish-language Jesuit newspaper in the city, declare that the Mexican colony saw Corpus Christi as an ethnic holiday. Like other immigrant parishes in the United States, St. Ignatius, through the work of some of its members, especially women, offered a number of social services to the Mexican population. The Centro de la Unión Católica de San Jose provided free medical care with the aid of El Paso physicians, started in 1903 at Sacred Heart. The organization moved in 1914 to a building at 3rd and Tornillo, where it assisted the members of St. Ignatius. It also began another branch at Guardian Angel School in East El Paso by 1919. Besides medical attention, one of the major problems for many Mexican mothers in El Paso had been what to do with their young children while they worked. Some left them with other relatives or friends, but many mothers found it difficult to do so. As a result, many women from St. Ignatius, assisted by the pastor, Father RPC, Trenches, organized in 1918 a daycare nursery, the Asia Guadalupana at 405 Park, under the initial direction of a board of directors composed of several Mexican women. The church transferred care of the Asio 1 year later to the Sisters of the Sacred Heart of the Poor, who arrived from Puebla, Mexico. Although the Garcia listed more than 200 members in 1919, its limited facilities could care for only 36 children. In order to raise funds for a new building, the nursery held jamicas, carnivals, and other fundraising events, and finally in 1922 moved into larger quarters at the corner of 5th and Virginia as another form of assistance to the neighborhood. 1908, some women from the St. Ignatius began distributing flour to the poor. Finally, church members raised funds for the destitute by sponsoring suppers such as the first enchilada dinner ever held at St. Ignatius, which netted $60.05. St. Ignatius also provided educational services through its parochial school, which began in 1905 with two sisters of Laredo and one lay teacher. Senora Isabel Cordona Buchanan, who taught first-year Spanish by 1913, enrollment expanded and classes had to be held in the church building. In addition to the school, the church offered night classes 1 year later for adults in English, Spanish, arithmetic, chemistry, physics, and sewing. 1917, it constructed a garage not only to repair cars, but to allow instruction in auto mechanics. Moreover, when school facilities became inadequate, the church began erecting a new building in 1918. at Second and Tornillo to accommodate 600 students. According to Carreras, however, Mexican architect M.L. Cordona of El Paso, who drew up the plans for the school, encountered many difficulties in its construction, including a labor strike. Nevertheless, La Revista Católica praised Cardona's design of the building and believed that although few people knew of Cardona's ability, St. Ignatius School will reveal to the present as well as future generation his intellectual and artistic qualities. Dedicated on January 26, 1919, the new school cost $30,000 gathered through fundraising and individual contributions. It contained 11 classrooms plus an auditorium and represented one of El Paso's most modern schools. In March, parishioners held a musical literary performance to inaugurate the new 650-seat school auditorium. Besides a Mexican orchestra, Miss E. Sanchez played the opera La Traviata on the piano. Parish members performed Rigoletta. The church choir under Miss Manuela Matisse sang Caridad by Rossini, and Reina Reyes serenaded the audience with her rendition of the American song Smiles. Later in the year, some church members staged the first drama in the auditorium, Eliza Ronstadt, in 3 acts with Maria Mendeville as Madame Ronstadt, emphasizing a form of high culture. These church productions appear to have been quite popular among parishioners, especially the more sophisticated political refugees. St. Ignatius supported various other cultural and recreational activities as well. Shortly after the church opened, it hired Trinidad Concha to assemble a young women's orchestra, which by 1908 appeared in public concerts. Concha further directed the church's well-known choir. In 1912, St. Ignatius obtained the benefit of another musical group when a boys' band at Sacred Heart had to leave that parish because it made too much noise and instead moved to St. Ignatius. This marked the start of the Young People's Band, which gained much prominence under the direction of Professor Melician Concha. By 1918, St. Ignatius also had one of the largest Mexican athletic clubs in the city, founded by the church to counter the success of the Mexican YMCA. The Association of Catholic Youth, Asociación Católica de Jóvenes, better known as the Club Anahuc, sponsored both athletic and cultural events. It possessed the best baseball, football, tennis, and basketball teams in South El Paso, and won several citywide contests. Moreover, its members aided in the building of athletic and playground facilities for the children of the area. And as part of its expression of loyalty to the United States during World War I, the club held picnics and athletic exhibitions to raise money for the war fund of the Knights of Columbus. The young members of this club, it appealed to other Mexicans, moved by a sense of duty and humanitarianism, and not being able to contribute in any other way to relieve the suffering of our own brothers, have decided to help through this exhibition. Won't you help us by attending? Remember, it will benefit our brothers who are fighting on the front lines. Indeed, the war gave St. Ignatius and the Catholic Church of El Paso another opportunity to stress the Americanization of the Mexicans, especially youth. After the United States declared war in 1917, the priests of St. Ignatius explained to their parishioners the alien registration provisions of the draft law and urged them to cooperate with the civil and military authorities. The church also requested Mexicans to buy Liberty bonds, bonos de libertad. Yet the parish's proudest contribution to the war came when more than 40 young Mexican men, both native and foreign born, enlisted for military service. Despite the fact that most Mexicans in the city claimed draft exemptions owing to their alien status, a few of the Mexican soldiers, moreover, served with distinction. Marcos de Amijo, who died in battle, received a Distinguished Service Cross, while the French government honored Manuel J. Escada with the Croix de Guerre. Marcelina Serena, however, represented not only St. Ignatius, most distinguished soldier, but one of the most decorated in El Paso and Texas. Serena received the American Distinguished Service Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, and military medal, the Italian Cross of Merit, and the British Medal of Bravery. This demonstration of American patriotism and on the part of St. Ignatius youth revealed the conviction of the Catholic Church in El Paso that regardless of native sentiments, Mexicans, for their own economic benefit, should learn the language, customs, and values of the United States as quickly as possible. After the war, the church strongly supported the city's Americanization program, which included night schools for the Mexican adults. In an editorial, even the sometime anti-American Revista Católica encouraged its Mexican readers to avail themselves of this education in order to help them obtain better jobs. This movement, initiated in Washington, the Mexican Catholic paper pointed out, to Americanize all foreigner in the United States has reached El Paso, and all indicators show that it will prove more fruitful in this day than in other places. The name of this program will scare off many Mexicans, and perhaps because of this fear, many will not take advantage of this excellent opportunity to improve their conditions. Hence, by 1920, the Catholic Church in El Paso, through its endorsement of post-war Americanization programs, as well as its own efforts in parochial schools, served, along with the public schools, as a major American institution of socialization, especially for children of Mexican immigrants, based on a viewpoint stressing loyalty to both church and country, which by the 1920s and 1930s increasingly meant the United States, the Catholic Church in the Southwest assisted Mexicans not only to adjust border life, but ultimately to believe in the American dream. Still, the constant stream of additional immigrants into El Paso and other southwestern areas after 1920, as well as the proximity of Mexico, meant that Mexican immigrant parishes were never completely Americanized. Rather than examples of an earlier part, many of them, due to continued immigration from Mexico, remain viable through poor institutions, helping to link Mexican immigrant communities in the United States with the mother country and culture. In addition to the Catholic Church, Protestant churches in South El Paso and throughout the border helped Mexicans to adjust American society. Protestant missions, settlement houses, and schools also sought to recruit and organize Mexican converts by the social services they provided. This attempt, however, met with considerable resistance on some occasions. The Times noted in 1893 a disturbance over a Mexican Methodist preacher in the South Side last evening while a Mexican Protestant evangelist was addressing a congregation of Mexicans in the open air not far from the Santa Fe section house in the First Ward. The newspaper informed its readers parties began throwing stones and clods of dirt into the crowd. Unquote. The Catholic Church itself warned its followers to beware of the Protestants who, according to La Revista Católica, posed not only a threat to the Mexicans' religion but to their culture as well. Despite the opposition, Protestant missionaries persevered in their working among the Mexican population. In their efforts, they recognized the value of converting and using Mexican preachers as a way of making cultural contact with immigrants. One observer remarked in 1893 that certificates to preach among their countrymen had been granted to Eugenio Rodriguez, Epiterio Madrid, and Jose M. Ibanez, who were the first graduates of the Congressional Training School in El Paso. The recruitment of Mexican preachers, as one Methodist official explained, would likewise be crucial for that church's efforts in Mexico. Addressing the Northwestern Mexican Conference of the Southern Methodist Church meeting in El Paso in 1906, the Reverend Dr. Ward emphasized the importance of the church's work south of the border. I know you have a difficult field of labor, he told his audience, but am glad to know that we have men in this work in Mexico, both Americans and Mexicans, whose zest and consecration are like that of which we read in apostolic times. We see that Protestant countries of the world represent the highest civilization and prosperity. Dr. Ward concluded that what the church needed in Mexico was a Martin Luther, and he must be a Mexican. Because of its border location and its large Mexican population, El Paso represented a significant missionary field for Protestant denominations, which conducted missions both along the border and in Mexico. The city directory for 1898 to 99 listed 3 Protestant churches in Ciudad: the Young People's Society of Christian Endeavor of Congregational Church, Mexican, with 40 members, including officers I.P. Balderas, F. Ponce, A.S. Esquero, and Hilario Hernandez; the Mexican Methodist Church at 519 South Stanton, headed by the Reverend Thomas Howard; and the Mexican Methodist Church south on South Campbell Street, led by the Reverend J.F. Corbin. As Mexican immigration to the El Paso grew after the turn of the century, several other Protestant churches and missions sprang up in the Mexican district. They included the Mexican Baptist Church at 701 South Stanton, the Mexican Christian Church at 1100 South Stanton, the Mexican Congregational Church at 607 South Kansas, the Mexican Methodist Church North at 715 Oregon, the Mexican Presbyterian Church at 619 Florence, the Mexican Nazarene Mission at 815 South El Paso, the Salvation Army's Mexican Mission at 412 South Stanton, the Lutheran Mexican Evangelical at 1001 South Campbell, and the Mexican Temperance League at 503 South Florence. While it was difficult to know the full Protestant impact on the Mexican populations, membership figures published in 1916 show that the churches had some limited success in making conversions. A total of 904 Mexicans belonged to 5 different Protestant sects, with almost half in the Presbyterian rank. The total Mexican Protestant population included 488 women and 416 men. Although an equal number of men and women over the age of 16 had become Protestants, a substantially high number of Mexican females under 16 had converted than under that age. Perhaps the most significant contribution of Protestants to the culture of South El Paso was their educational and recreational work. Under the auspices of the Methodist Episcopal Lydia Patterson Institute on South Florence Street opened its doors in 1914, with the objective of educating Mexican young women, especially political and religious refugees, containing a gymnasium, baths, dormitories, and dining rooms. The Institute sought through its courses to provide a most excellent opportunity for the young men to receive a thorough education amid Christian surroundings and an atmosphere of the highest morality. 2 years later, about 200 Mexican students attended the Institute, which still represents one of the El Paso's oldest Protestant institutions. In addition, Protestant Protestants, through the local YMCA, began a Mexican branch of the Y in order to assist in the Christianization and Americanization of Mexican young women. Young men. The Mexican Y, operating at first in the basement of the Lydia Patterson Institute, claimed 1,000 members when it moved into new headquarters near Ciudad. In 1918, working primarily among political refugees, the Mexican Y initially aided the children of wealthier exiles in El Paso. We have in El Paso young men refugees from all parts of Mexico. J.V. Escobar, the secretary of the Mexican Y, stated in an interview, and among these representatives of the best families of the Republic, they are the hope of the Mexican people, because they have learned many broadening and truly democratic things in the United States that they may give to the Republic. Besides providing recreation through its gymnasium facilities, the Mexican Y offered instruction in the Bible and English, as well as sponsoring movies, dances, literary presentations, and counseling. Because it dealt with an immigrant population, however, the Y, as well as other Protestant agencies, could not divorce itself from Mexican cultural traditions. For example, the Y's most notable cultural production consisted of the lavish annual Cinco de Mayo, the 5th of May, celebration honoring the great Mexican victory over the invading French army in 1862. Nevertheless, the Y aimed at eventually Americanizing Mexican youth. To this end, it expanded by 1920 its scope to include children of the Mexican working class. Consequently, the Y announced that year that its functions had attracted almost 30,000 Mexican young men and boys. An additional Y branch at the El Paso smelter claimed a total yearly attendance of more than 50,000. One Mexican-American official of the organization succinctly expressed the ideological and political objectives associated with such Y work among the local Mexicans. According to S1 Esquivel, the Mexican YMCA was one of the best means for dealing with the Mexican problem. In the United States, 2 million young men cannot reside in the midst of a foreign people, unquote. Esquivel stressed at a Y meeting, without eventually becoming a liability unless they are made an asset. Through its facilities, he explained the Y could instruct the Mexicans in English and American values and customs, and in doing so, serve the national interest. Quote, work among the Mexican population of El Paso and other portions of this country will repay 1,000-fold. The Mexican-American officer concluded it will tend to avoid friction between the two republicas and will increase the loyalty of the Mexican population toward the United States, unquote. Reaching a large number of Mexican young men and boys by the late 1920s, the Mexican Y, along with the Protestant churches in the barrios, furnished additional institutional support for the acculturation of the Mexican population. Yet, despite the cultural transitions inaugurated among the Mexicans by both Catholics and Protestant churches, the constant influx of new Mexican immigrants, many from rural areas, not only reinforced Mexican cultural traditions, but, as Garcia observed in the 1920s, also aided in the survival of certain religious folk cults and superstitions. One of the best examples of a folk cult in El Paso involved the appearance of a young Mexican woman called Santa Teresa. Born in the little village of Cabarro in Sonora, Teresa Urrea, at the age of 16, began to attract attention by her alleged healing powers. She believed that she possessed the power to cure the poor, and villagers who claimed that Teresa had worked miracles referred to as Santa Teresa. However, authorities accused her of being part of a revolutionary movement against Porfirio Diaz and forced her to flee Cabarro Cabora and go into exile first in Arizona in 1892 and later in El Paso in 1896. When she arrived in the border city, Santa Teresa proceeded to set up a tent in Ciudad, where large numbers of Mexicans visited her and asked to be cured. 2 years later, it was reported that hundreds of Mexicans from the surrounding area were entering El Paso in wagons and on burritos and heading to see Teresa. On one day, about 3,000 persons, mostly Mexicans, but including some Americans, visited the Mexican healer. After having seen the young woman, one American claimed that he could use his limp left arm once more. But now look, he exclaimed, I can lift it alone above my head. Tears came to his eyes as he cried out, Thank God, I can use it again. Santa Teresa has at least done me some good. Impressed by the intention aroused by Santa Teresa, the Times commented that although a large number of people scoffed at her and an even greater number were believers, not committing itself either way, the Times only suggested that it was excitement over the folk healer continued. Every train into El Paso would be filled with people to be cured or to see a miracle. It is not certain how long Santa Teresa resided in El Paso, but the Times noted in 1898 that then she lived in Clifton, Arizona, according to her friends. Teresa had left El Paso because she feared being kidnapped and returned to Mexico by Diaz's spies. Although famous faith healers such as Santa Teresa were rare among Mexican immigrants, it appears that despite urbanization and secularization, Mexican popular religious traditions survived along the border. As a form of ethnic self-protection, as well as an expression of ethnicity, Mexican social organizations in El Paso revealed the Mexicans' accommodation to their new American setting. Forced to organize in a new and sometimes hostile society, some of El Paso's Mexicans, especially more skilled and educated ones, formed several mutual and fraternal associations that helped provide organized leaderships in the Mexican settlement. Similar societies, moreover, existed in Mexico and hence were familiar forms of association. As mediating institutions, the mutual and fraternal organizations, besides aiding in the preservation and encouragement of Mexican ethnic conscience among the immigrants, helped form a more permanent and cohesive Mexican community. As early as 1893, the Mexican newspaper El Hispano Americano printed a notice from La Unión Occidental Mexicana, the Mexican Western Union, which was one of the first Mexican mutual aid societies in El Paso. Quote, it is neither more or less than what its name implies, a group of persons of Mexican origin, stated organizer, and political exile. Victor L. Ochoa, he went on to explain that the Union had several objectives: to aid and defend its members, to unalterably maintain the Spanish language, to protect the morality of its members, and to spread fraternal bonds among Mexican nationals. In the United States, in addition, when members died, his wife and children would receive $2.50 from each union member. 1 year later, Mutual Aid Society Los Caballos del Progreso, the gentlemen of progress, stressed that the poor economic conditions of Mexicans in the United States resulted from a lack of unity, and that in order to alleviate this problem, Los Caballos had been organized. El Defensor noted that when one of the society's members who had not kept up his duties died, Los Caballos refused to pay the funeral costs as a lesson to other negligent members. One Mexican newspaper also urged unity through organization. When it observed in 1899 that despite the large numbers of Mexicans in El Paso, The city's oldest Mexican mutual benefit society, 1888, the Sociedad Mutualist Mexicano La Protectora, had only 40 members. It pointed out the validity of the motto, Unity Makes Force, and informed its readers that only through organization had the United States become a great power. If it is true, then, that unity makes force, it added, then we do not understand why Mexicans do not develop those relationships that will unite us. This Sociedad Mutualista Mexicana La Protectora, the paper asserted, aimed to unite and protect Mexicans who lived in El Paso. Had it not been for this society, the paper believed that Mexicans in the city would have been deprived of a common meeting place where they, quote, could exchange impressions of our beloved country, unquote. Las Noticias further reminded Mexicans of their obligations to one another as members of the same race and sons of the same mother. Mexico, among its benefits, La Protectora assisted members who required hospitalization and paid for funeral costs. Las Dos Americas, another Mexican newspaper in El Paso, expressed its gratitude in 1898 to La Protectora's Mexican American president, A.J. Esquejeda, and its vice president, C. Aguirre, for their consideration during the funeral of Antonio G. Gallardo, who had been killed by a Southern Pacific train at Deming, New Mexico. Although it appears that membership of La Protectora remained small, it met regularly every second and fourth Monday of the month. Its leadership seems to have come from Mexican Americans like Esquejeda, but the entire composition of its membership cannot be determined. As more Mexicans arrived in El Paso by the turn of the century, several other benefits and fraternal groups appeared. The Times announced in 1907 that 7 Mexican societies of El Paso would participate in that year's 16th of September celebrations honoring Mexican independence. These included La Beneficia, Patriotic Society from the Smelter, the Sociedad Union Constructors, La Mutualista, Los Higos de Hidalgo, and the Sociedad Philharmonica. Few Americans, if any, a Mexican told a newspaper Times reporter, are aware of the wonderful growth and activity to be found in the Mexican fraternal orders now existing in the Southwest. While the chief element of these orders is made up of the common working class, it must be remembered that there are also affiliated with these societies many Mexican cultures. Among them are professional and businessmen. El Paso has the distinction of having the largest number of these lodges, Tucson ranking next, it being the place where 2 of the most important orders, the Sociedad Zaragoza and the Sociedad Hispano-Americano, have their home offices. He further explained that the Hispano-American Society paid $1,000 to the family of a deceased member and $200 to a member upon the death of his wife. In addition, he declared that although the Sociedad Zaragoza had been operating for a shorter time than other societies, it had larger membership with 28 branches throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and El Paso. It was represented by Lodge Number 18, founded that year with 90 members. The growing numbers of Mexican immigrants and refugees in El Paso after 1910 also influenced the expansion of these societies. Mexicans in El Paso are interested in lodge work to an extent probably not generally known, unquote. Member Pedro A. Candelaria stated in an interview in 1915, Candelaria observed that the Sociedad Mutualista Mexicana had a membership of 115 and La Constructora had 300 members. Both represented the two largest societies in the city and intended to protect the widows and orphans of deceased members. Each of these organizations assessed every member $3 whenever a death occurred and turned the amount over to the widow. Candelaria pointed out that still another lodge, La Beneficia, operated in East El Paso. These organizations had developed substantially in recent years, he concluded, owing to the arrival of Mexican refugees. The sharp rise in the Mexican population of the Southwest during the years of the Mexican Revolution encouraged consolidation among Mexican mutual aid societies and increased their emphasis on insurance practices. The best example of the change can be seen in the activities of La Sociedad Alianza Hispano-Americana, organized in 1894 in Tucson. It grew from a small number of lodges to 88 in 1919, with more than 4,000 members from California to Texas. And with additional lodges in northern Mexico, it hoped to unite all Mexicans and Latin Americans in the United States into one family under the principles of protection, morality, and education. According to the Alliance's historian, its membership consisted of both lower middle class and working class people. In one of the largest demonstrations of Mexican social organization in the United States, El Paso hosted a national convention of the Arizona in 1910, attended by close to 200 delegates from New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, and Texas. At their opening session, the mayors of both El Paso and Juarez welcomed the delegates and assured them they would not be molested by the police or of either border town. One of the main items in the convention's agenda dealt with changes in insurance payments. Every member paid a flat rate of $1 each month for $1,000 insurance without regard to age or other conditions. However, the Times reported that the officers were eager to adopt a more scientific plan. The Finance Committee noted that the Supreme Lodge had $16,790 on hand, of which $14,000 had been put in the reserve fund. Although the convention voted to retain a flat rate for present members, it approved a new classified assessment for future ones, but kept the amount of insurance that could be secured at $500 or $1,000 with $100 and $200 funeral benefits. 9 years later, La Patria published an advertisement for the Alianza, containing both its insurance provisions and a list of its lodges in the Southwest. The notice emphasized that the Alianza had no political or religious qualifications for membership, that it treated every member equally, that each received the same benefits, and that it spent none of its members' funds for amusements. The Alianza also stressed that women could purchase a policy, for we believe them to be as worthy and as entitled to the same right to protect their children who depend on them, unquote. Despite the fact that most of its members were humble workers, unquote, the Alianza proudly announced that since its formation, it had paid out $1.5 million in benefits. To share in the Alianza's protection, a Mexican had to pay $3.50 admission fee plus $1 to $2 for a medical examination. Monthly payments would then be determined by the amount of the policy and the age of its holder. We respectfully invite you and your family to join the Alianza, the ad told the readers of La Patria. In 1919, 3 of its lodges, apparently located in Ciudad, functioned in El Paso: La Patria, observed that members of the different lodges could attend one another's meetings. In addition, Jesus M. Ortiz, who had been named Alianza organizer for Texas, believed that a new chapter could be established in East El Paso. Since many Mexicans there had expressed an interest in the society, besides El Paso, lodges could be found in nearby New Mexico, in Silver City, Hillsboro, Santa Rita, Las Cruces, and Hurley. Like other immigrant organizations in the United States, the Mexican Mutual and Fraternal Societies of El Paso provided social and cultural activities for their members. Many of these social functions consisted of dances sponsored by different lodges in 1911. For example, the Mexican Secret Societies held a grand ball at the Fraternal Brotherhood Hall. The national colors of Mexico will be flying, unquote. The Times commented, and those who cannot have one of the most enjoyable times of their life will be hard to please, unquote. 1919, the Logia Morales held its second grand ball at Liberty Hall, and in 1920, the Sociedad Mutualista Zaragoza Independiente sponsored a literary and dance show to celebrate its 12th anniversary. That same year, the Alianza hosted an artistic presentation to raise funds. Moreover, the lodges sponsored the 16th of September celebrations, as well as other Mexican patriotic holidays. When William Howard Taft met Porfirio Diaz in El Paso in 1909, the city's Mexican societies turned out in force to honor both leaders and the nations they represented. As the president's carriage neared the position occupied by the Mexican societies, a reporter noticed that word of Taft's parade down El Paso Street. There was a tumult of applause, cheers, and cries of "Viva Taft, Viva Taft." After Taft had visited Diaz in Juarez, the Mexican organizations joined the parade up El Paso Street to downtown Cleveland Square. 4 different Mexican societies, the Times observed, numbering about 1,000 men and all wearing natty uniforms, comprised the divisions. For Mexican Americans, the social activities of the lodges became quite important because participation in Anglo-Saxon society remained limited, although the Women's Club, the El Paso Country Club, and other American social organizations had no clear policy on the exclusion of Mexican members. Businessman Felix Martinez, who belonged to the Toltec Men's Club, appeared to have been one of the few persons, Mexican descent throughout the period, who claimed membership in an American social group. Social intercourse between Mexicans and Americans on an organized level seems to have occurred only during special political or patriotic events, or the arrival of a major Mexican dignitary such as Diaz. Because of this de facto social separation, as well as their own cultural affinity, Mexican Americans either formed their own clubs or joined immigrant organizations. In 1907, the Logia Fraternal Number 30, composed exclusively of Mexican Americans, held a banquet in honor of Mexican Independence Day at the Sheldon Hotel, attended by 132 persons, including 35 prominent American politicians. Excuse me. The walls of the big dining room had been decorated with a number of Mexican and American flags, while at the south end of the hall, facing the Toastmaster, was an immense Mexican and a huge American flag leaning so close together that their folds embraced each other, unquote. After some of the American guests spoke, Lodge officer Agapito Martinez emphasized that it gave him great pride to say that every member of the lodge held American citizenship and yet could also be proud of Mexico's achievements. Quote, "Freedom," said editor Lauro Aguirre, started the fire at Philadelphia, at Paris, and in Mexico. Ziem Oriza ended the speeches by a toast to the menu motto, quote, "After all, what is better than friendship?" The annual 16th of September celebration proved to be not only the most important Mexican cultural event in El Paso and throughout the Southwest, but also an indication of the level of social organization and cooperation that could occur among the different Mexican societies. The 1897 ceremonies, for example, stood out as one of the most successful holidays in El Paso and revealed the various cultural activities that often took place during this community fiesta. As early as July, the Mexican newspaper El Monitor announced a meeting of La Junta Patriotica Mexicana, the Mexican Patriotic Council, to select a board of directors and decide on the best format of the 16th of September celebration. 1 month later, the paper criticized some Mexican Americans who did not believe that the 16th of September had any meaning of them and refused to support the festivities. To these ungringados, Americanized Mexicans, who negate that they are Mexicans because they were born in the United States, we ask, what blood runs through their veins? Do they think they are members of the Anglo-Saxon race who only happen to have dark skins because they were born on the border? What nonsense! Que barbaridad. El Monitor went on to add that this did not mean that Mexican Americans should not be good citizens of the United States and even fight for Tio Samuel. If it went to war against a European or an Asiatic nation, however, in the event of conflict between the United States and Mexico or a Latin American nation, El Monitor believed that every Mexican living north of the border should go to the defense of their blood brothers, unquote, and the country of their parents' birth. The paper concluded that by asking, why shouldn't there be any reason now for us to feel ashamed of being Mexican, unquote. Led by Junta Patriotica, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, Patriotica, the Mexicans of El Paso prepared to celebrate the independence of Mexico. In its September 12th edition, El Monitor dedicated its coverage to the Mexican workers of the city, to whom we wish all kinds of happiness during these glorious days, unquote. It also reminded its readers of the events to be held on both the 15th and the 16th, and commented that the prepared program left nothing to be desired. Thanks to the work of the junta, similar festivities would occur in other areas of Texas, as well as in New Mexico, Arizona, and California, but the paper predicted that one of the best 16th of Septembers would be held in El Paso. To stimulate patriotic sentiments, El Monitor retold the story of the fathers of Mexican independence, Hidalgo and Morales, and of the independence struggle against the tyranny of Spain. Long live the illustrious liberator. The article eulogized Hidalgo and Viva Mexico. Organized in honor of the Mexican colony, especially in the Junta Patriotica and the Mexican consul Francisco Milan, only rain-spotted and otherwise flawless event. The celebration began on the morning of the 15th when Consul Milan dedicated the observance to Don Porfirio Diaz. That evening in Junta, the Mexican Mutual Benefit Society, La Protectora, and the Mexican students of Sacred Heart School marched on from 5th Street bordering the downtown area to Sacred Church in Ciudad. Preceded by a Mexican band, throughout the route, The homes and businesses of both Mexicans and Americans had been decorated with the Mexican tricolors. At 8 p.m., Consul Malone and the president of the Junta de Rechi, accompanied by their wives, arrived at the platform in front of the church, and the program commenced by the playing of the Mexican national anthem. The more than 3,000 people who attended also heard recitations by several young people, as well as songs and piano recitals. A speech in English by a lawyer, T.J. Bale, that praised Mexican independence and Hidalgo received much applause. After several songs, Don Esteban Gomez del Campo delivered the main speech, touching on various Mexican historical themes. The band then played both the Mexican and American anthems, followed by the two tunes originally composed by Trinidad Concha, entitled "On the Shores of the Rio Grande and Through El Paso," unquote. At last, the Secretary of Junta read Hidalgo's Act of Independence, a grito de Dolores, and Consul Malone said a few words. The program concluded with the Mexican national anthem sung by a chorus of young Mexican women. The following morning of the 16th, a parade through downtown El Paso containing both Mexican and American units ended the Independence Day celebrations. As the 16th of September festivities partly indicated, the different cultural influences touch the Mexican population of El Paso. Given diverse cultural levels within the Mexican settlement, these influences also had varied effects on and responses. More acculturated than the immigrants, the minority of Mexican Americans felt the pull of both cultures much more strongly. The civilization is American, nominally Gamino, observed of Mexican Americans in the 1920s, and exhibits the principal material aspects of modern American civilization. But intellectually and emotionally, it lives in local Mexican traditions. On the other hand, the recently arrived immigrants retain to a considerable degree their native traditions in the form of language, folklore, superstitions, songs, and religious holidays, which express their national origins. However, the impact of the American industrialization and urbanization forced the immigrants to adjust to changed conditions. In the process, many of El Paso's Mexicans formed relationships with one another through families, recreational, mutual aid, fraternal, and patriotic organizations that, on the one hand, provided a cultural security and continuity, and on the other hand, revealed new American condition and influences. Moreover, the schools, both public and parochial, American material goods, and to a degree, churches represented institutions and attractions within the barrios that affected the subtle and gradual Americanization of the Mexicans, although their culture underwent some transformation as they adjusted to immigrant life. Mexicans, as Gamillo further recognized, never became integrally assimilated to American civilization, unquote. He believed that the problem retarding the complete Americanization of the Mexicans lay in the large gulf between what they call purely American culture, unquote, and purely Mexican culture. The economic discrimination and segregation aimed at Mexicans in El Paso also made it difficult to assimilate them as well as Mexican Americans, because employers desired to keep them as a source of cheap labor. Furthermore, unlike European immigration, which slowed to a trickle in the 1920s, Mexican immigration persisted and reinforced a distinct Mexican presence in El Paso. Mexicans believed they would soon return to their homeland and therefore felt no strong motivation to discard their cultural traditions. Mexico, of course, was right next door. Consequently, a dialectical relationship existed between the immigrants' native culture and the attempt by American institutions and reformers to restructure earlier habits and instill a new urban industrial discipline among the Mexicans. The eventual result, a Mexican border culture, neither completely Mexican nor American, but one revealing contrasting attractions and pressures between both cultures. Yet Mexican border culture was and is by no means monolithic because different experiences are represented. Recent arrivals display what Galarza calls the most authentic transplant of Mexican working class culture, unquote, whereas middle class newcomers, such as many of the political refugees during the revolutionary period, bring with them a more sophisticated bourgeoisie, one of both Mexican and European origins. Finally, Mexican Americans, especially the children and grandchildren of immigrants, have faced an erosion of their Mexican culture as American institutions, including the acculturated family environment, bring them into the fold of American mass cultural attrition. Excuse me. According to Galarza, must be seen as a result of the destruction of Mexican institutions, including the loss of land through the migration process both into and within the United States and through the elimination of such earlier Mexican cultural units in the southwest as villages, mining towns, presidios, military outposts, haciendas, and the missions. For that is what happens, Galarza concludes, when two social groups, Americans and Mexicans, palpably unequal in technology or some other vital factor, intersect each other. Those who are overcome, if they are not annihilated, are left with the residues of culture, those resources and institutions which are least useful or threatening to the winner indeed, which might even be amusing to him. Thus, cultural pluralism can conceal paraplegic subcultures that were not born that way. Mexican Southwestern culture has been crippled. That is the essence of its history. This is the end of chapter 10. Thank you.